This is about defending democracy. This is no longer Democrats versus Republicans. What do you want your kids to believe in? There must be give and take.
This is White Flag with Joe Walsh.
Former Congressman Joe Walsh here. So there's a group I recently found and have become a really big fan of. Starts With Us. They're a movement working to overcome the extreme political and cultural division in America. You can find them online at startswith.us. I love them because they're showing people it's possible to have real, meaningful, productive conversations with people you disagree with. I'm a big fan of this. This is what I try to do on my podcast because right now in America, we have two major political parties that are at each other's throats. And the most dangerous aspect of this is that it's led many of us to avoid having hard conversations with people we disagree with. We're afraid to have these hard conversations, afraid to deal with the tough stuff, so we walk away. But to save our democracy, we have to stick around. I mean, if we all walk away from the table, then who the hell is sticking around to figure things out? This is what I so love and admire about the work that Starts With Us is doing. They're sticking around. They are the movement for people like you and me who want to fight the extreme political and cultural division in this country. Because guess what? People like us, we are in the majority. Starts With Us found that 87% of Americans are tired of how politically and culturally divided we are. So yeah, I'm not just a fan, I'm part of the movement too. And if you're listening to me right now, I want you to join the movement as well. Go to startswith.us and get their free newsletter. Sign up for their free newsletter. Get involved. Start there. Startswith.us. Thanks. Hey, Joe Walsh, former Congressman Joe Walsh. This is White Flag with Joe Walsh. Thank you for listening. Listen wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Spotify. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, White Flag with Joe Walsh. Every week, I try to sit down with people who don't think like I do necessarily, but they have an interesting perspective. Matthew Dowd, a friend, certainly has an interesting perspective. You know him. You see him on TV all the time. Longtime American political pundit, strategist, and consultant. He was on ABC News for years. You'll see him on MSNBC now. Imparting helpful perspective and wisdom in the midst of this crazy political time. Matthew, how are you?
I'm great, my friend. How are you?
I'm good. I'm tired, but we'll get to that in a second. Just start here. This episode is airing this afternoon, Wednesday afternoon, so the day after the indictment came down. Your thought, your gut reaction to what happened yesterday?
It's a combination of two things. It's one, gratitude that our system still holds people accountable, and there's a constitutional law system of law and order and justice that seems to work. That we can even have a former president with all the power and all the following that he has still be held accountable. So gratitude for that. A bit of sadness and somberness that we're at this point, that we actually had a president that did this, that many of us were aware of at the time he was nominated and then elected, that wasn't unlikely, but that we still ended up here as our American republic, that we ended up in this situation. So gratitude that the system still works in holding people accountable so far, but sadness that we're here.
Matthew, peel that back for me. I heard a lot of that last night. Some of that, variations of that what a sad day, a tragic day. I think you have a different reason for that. I consider yesterday to be a good day, a happy day, a day to celebrate accountability, the rule of law, justice, and all of that. Is it primarily a good day? What happened?
Yes, I think if you've had a pie chart of emotions, I think it's a celebratory day and a day of gratitude for our republic. that were here. And it also, I think, underlines all those people, whether they were county clerks, secretary of states, attorney generals, governors, some on the Republican side, who stood up in the midst of this to all of the lies and all of the push and all of the coercion. And that yesterday, I think for them, I think was a very good day. I mean, I think it's a good day for Americans, but I think it's a very good day for people that many names we don't know of.
Yeah.
That were really against the wall in this and stood for our democracy. And Jack Smith, I think that was a good day for them.
Hey, you know me, you know my background. I come from the Trump base. I come from the cult, the MAGA cult, and I got out of it. I still interact with these folks every day. It doesn't surprise me, based on what I've heard every day, that these indictments are strengthening him among Republican voters. Your take on that?
Yeah, you and I think have a pretty good sense of that base. I mean, I worked for George W. Bush, saw a lot of the Republican primary and the emergence, and I actually started to signal this was coming.
Yes.
When John McCain picked Sarah Palin, she was drawing bigger crowds than John McCain. That this was we were moving in this direction. I live normally in a small town in Texas, so I interact with a lot of MAGA folks. I have family members who are MAGA folks who live around the country, who grew up in Michigan, in all of that. And so when he was indicted, I think there is a sense they have transferred their sense of self to Donald Trump, and so I think they lack a place. Many of them operate in fear, and they lack a sense of place in our society, or they feel they do. And so I think they transfer that to Donald Trump. So anybody that confronts Donald Trump is really confronting their sense of self. And it doesn't surprise me at all that his average lead from November to March was about 15 points. Now his average lead is 30.
Yeah.
So it didn't surprise me. Something cannot be surprising and still be shocking.
Yes,
so it's not surprising, but it's still shocking that we have, basically a third of the country who is unwilling to look at Donald Trump with clear lenses.
Matt, you put that in a really interesting way. They transferred their sense of self to Trump, which then leads to a question I've pondered. If and when Trump is gone down the road, what happens to them? What happens to that transfer of self? What happens to kind of the MAGA cult when he is gone?
Well, I think that's a great question. A bigger question is I don't think people, as you know, in your personal life and throughout life, if they believe something that we think is wrong, somebody confronting them about it isn't going to change their mind.
Yeah.
Whatever that happens to be. They only get their back up more because it's very hard for human beings to admit they made a mistake and they were wrong about something. And so the only path to some of them is Donald Trump sort of leaving the scene or forced from the scene to a degree. And then there's a percentage of them that will reflect on it and say they may not ever admit they were wrong.
Yeah.
But they may just move to something else, which is kind of a tacit admission that they messed up. But I think in this confrontational moment, that's not going to happen.
What's not going to happen? That they'll move.
That third is not going to come up and say, "Oh boy, I was wrong. I'm gonna change my vote in 2024." I sent out a tweet today that Donald Trump, if he's the nominee, and I think he is going to be the nominee, he's going to get 94% of the GOP vote.
I saw that.
94% of the GOP vote. He actually is going to get as much or more vote this time than he did against Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Last time, and so that I don't think is going to change. It's just we're in an interesting moment. You and I mentioned this earlier, but that I think we're in this very transitory moment and crisis moment of our republic that we have to get through.
I want to explore that with you in a moment because I find that really interesting. And don't hit me over the head. Some people continue to hit me over the head because of my help in supporting Trump the first time around. As part of my penance, I still engage with his hardcore supporters every day and every week. And to your point, Matthew, the vast majority, I can't budge. Every now and then I budge someone, and the only way I do it is when I just respectfully but forcefully put nuggets of truth in front of them repeatedly. So I can move some, but to your point, the vast majority aren't going to move.
Yeah, and all of those, the fascinating thing about the base is all of those ones that have been individually moved. And I actually think I've had the same conversation that you've had with a number of folks, most of which can't move. But the first step in it, and I think Democrats can have a tendency to get this wrong. First, going to your original statement, you get it more than I do, but I still get, you should shut up. You work for George W. Bush. He started all this, so why don't you just go away, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And my response is that's a heck of a way to build a team.
Yeah.
I mean, in my view, the Soviet Union in World War II wasn't like some great angel.
Yeah.
But we sided with the Soviet. I'm not saying you're the Soviet Union.
Right.
I'm the Soviet Union. But at some point, you have to build a team, regardless of somebody's past, if you're for the same thing, which is a preservation of our democracy in this moment, which I don't understand why Democrats do that. The other part that Democrats I don't think understand is that the only way you move some of them is with empathy, level of empathy where you voice some understanding of why they have these fears.
Yeah.
Of why they are where they are, why they are emotionally where they are, and then kind of walk it through with them in that sort of in their guts and get them to the point of, I agree, but what's the best way to get accomplish what you want to accomplish? It isn't a flawed person like Donald Trump. It's another mode to it. And I think when people skip over the empathy part and move right to, here's a set of logical facts, you're never going to get people to change their mind.
Matt, you mentioned family members and friends who are MAGA Trump supporters. You've gone down this road with some of them with empathy. It's a difficult road, even with empathy, isn't it?
It's an incredibly difficult road, especially, and you know this, especially if people have been friends or family in this. And it's hard not to look at them like, what is wrong with you, right? What don't you get or whatever? But as I said earlier, it's your confrontational sort of hate speech isn't going to move anybody, and it's only going to entrench them. And I've come to the place of I'll speak my truth, but the most important to me thing is to maintain some level of connections.
Yeah.
And not lose those connections.
250 million adults in the country. 62%, I think about 156 million of them voted roughly in 2020. Trump got 75 million votes. I would guess, Matt Dowd, that of those 75 million, maybe 60%, maybe I'm high, are hardcore Trump boom, boom, booms. So we're talking about, 45 million adults, 18% of all the adults in the country. We don't just write them off, do we? Or what do we do?
Well, no, I don't think you write off any American or write off anybody. I mean, obviously, there's people need to be held accountable that did actions in this that made it worse in the country. But I think about this from history. It's about a third. So if you take that number and look at a thing, it's about a third. Our history has been filled with about a third that whenever we're in a transformational space, a third fights it. So a third of the people in the Revolutionary War wanted to stay with the monarchy. A third of the people wanted to keep slavery and keep things as is. A third of the people wanted women not to be able to vote. A third of the people was opposed to civil rights and the movements that happened. And so we roughly have about a third. Anytime there's change, major change in our society, about a third locks in, roots in, and doesn't want to see that change. They actually are and it's oftentimes when the changing nature of the country, whether it's color, it's culture, and all that happens, because they lose a sense of place and they hold on to what they have.
Yeah.
I think that we have to isolate those people in a degree politically, but they're actually members of our community. I mean, you know this as well as I do. There's a bunch of MAGA folks that would show up at my house. I mean, they did
Yeah.
when I lost power, or I needed water, or my truck wouldn't start,
Yeah.
or whatever the thing, or the church needed people to help out. They would be there.
Yeah.
So they're compassionate Americans. They're in a bad place, but they are compassionate Americans that deserve our empathy.
And they're primarily, Matthew Dowd, as you and I know, the GOP base is primarily middle-aged and older white folk. And I've always believed that these folks, the base of the party, had fears and concerns for years. Life was changing really quickly, they thought. And I've always felt like the party establishment ignored them. And then Tea Party people like me came along and we wound them up. So by the time Trump got there, they were just primed for a strong man. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and I think I mean there's so many places that are such canaries in coal mine in this, and I'll give you a perfect example is West Virginia. So in 2000, when we were planning Bush's campaign, I brought up the idea that we could carry West Virginia. Only I think one Republican had carried West Virginia in the last 60 years or something. And I noticed something in West Virginia about those white working class people that were traditionally always Democratic. We ended up winning West Virginia. It wasn't even that close. I mean, it was closer than it is now. And that movement saw in West Virginia in 2000, then that same thing went into Ohio, went into Pennsylvania, went into Michigan, went into Wisconsin, it's not we saw what we've seen in the South, but this is a different sort of traditional white working class that was Democratic, that believed that the Democratic Party stood with them, whether it was pro-union or all of those sorts of things. But what they ended up happening is both the economy didn't serve them, the sort of Clinton years of these free trade agreements and us walking into the global marketplace and all that, and people being left out, and a lot of wealth was created, not for them, but for many people. And what it's easy to do when people feel that is somebody to point out and say, instead of saying what's the real problem and how do we manage it, they point, that's the problem. That's the enemy over there.
Yeah.
Many ways it was people of color or immigrants or whatever it happened to be. And Donald Trump was expert at that. I'll give Donald Trump credit. He's not an idiot, and he's very understands politics as well as anybody in this. Identified an enemy instead of speaking to him about what was really going on and how to really solve the problem. And I think, for all of the favors Bill Clinton gets, you could actually draw a thing where his policies helped create this problem.
Oh, explain that.
Because his policies left out a whole segment of the manufactured industrial base of our society. And though many people benefited by free trade and we got cheaper products and all of that kind of thing, there was a whole segment of society that was just left out, and it was basically told, come along and come walk happily into the global marketplace, or we're going to forget you. And they ended up being forgotten.
Yes.
That's a fact.
Yes, completely. Oh, Matt, that's spot on. And again, I say this as a free market, free trader. There's a real populist element to this base. That's what they've told me. That a variation of, they've told me this for 6 years. Joe, I want to go back to America where the plant was in town. Men married women, women married men. You could say Merry Christmas, but it's like this mythical time when the job and everything was right there.
Yep. I mean, and you're right to say it's a mythical time because all of those great moments, a whole part of society was left out and people were discriminated against and all of those things that happened. And then, the creation of Fox News in 1996, there's very many factors, which then fed information to confirm people's biases, which is one of the major problems we have. in that we're confirming people's biases and prejudices, and people can find information outlets that confirm those biases instead of test those biases and prejudices. That all fed this. Newt Gingrich was part of it, all of those sorts of things. And it led, I actually also don't believe, Barack Obama, and he did in elections, and I actually think he's going to go down as a good president. I think in managing it. I don't think there would have been a Donald Trump without a Barack Obama.
Explain that.
Because I think what happened was people saw, oh my God, America really is changing. Not only is an African-American man president, but an African-American man with his name Barack Obama.
Yeah.
America is not what it was. And as you and I both know, diversity change is going to be inexorable. And it's always been through our country as immigrants came, whether it was Irish, German, Italians, whatever it happened to be. But I think it raised the level of fear and anxiety in those people that Donald Trump was prepared to jump into. And then when you nominate folks, I think he's a decent person, Mitt Romney.
Yeah.
They feel corporatist.
Yes.
They feel like they're going along with the same system. And then I'll tell you, I have a brother who's a good example, who voted for Donald Trump in 2016, didn't vote for him in 2020. And his whole premise was, listen, the system's, and he works in manufacturing. He goes, the system's so screwed up. Can he make it any worse?
Boom.
All of these folks are just doing the same thing. We need something different. I'm willing to try it. And of course, he realized, well, that was a mistake.
Oh, Matt, that's so spot on. I felt that. I heard that in the Tea Party wave that sent me to Congress, that the system's fucked up. We need a disruption. We need disruption. And there can be good disruption. Turns out he's an evil disruptor. But yeah, you're right. That when Trump said shit like, I want to shake it up and burn it down, that connected to a lot of people.
Yeah, well, and it's because I think they think, and justifiably in some degree, not in others, that the institutions of the institutional parts of our country weren't serving them.
Yeah.
We're not serving them. And that's why I sometimes get frustrated about the argument, we need to preserve the institutions, we need to preserve the institutions, we need to preserve the institutions. There's many people, and I'm actually one of them, that think some of the institutions need to be taken away because they don't serve the American public.
We live in, this is a populist moment, correct?
Yes. But this is interesting. I think the smartest, I'm sort of a populist.
Yeah, you are.
I have to say. And, I'm one of 11 kids that was a son of an automotive guy, worked for an automotive company in Michigan and Detroit. And, we experienced the riots and all that. So I grew up, but I actually believe that the path through this is something that I like to call inclusive populism.
Talk to that.
Which is a populism that confronts the corporate entities, large governmental entities, things that are only interested in their own self-serving behavior, but is inclusive. It's not a white populism. It's not a anti-immigrant populism. It's an inclusive populism.
Okay.
That brings everybody on and confronts what actually is going on, which is these huge levels of income inequality in the country that people believe, and I do to a degree, that doesn't serve most of the country.
Okay, so that's a really interesting point, and I've had to wrestle with that, being the libertarian free market guy I am. But you make an interesting point, Matt, and as batshit crazy as the Republican Party is, the Democrats have their issues, and if Trump wasn't so batshit crazy, they could really make inroads with working class black and brown Americans as well on what you just said.
Yeah, and so there's two sides of this coin. Is yes, they could, but what the interesting thing to me is black and brown and white working class all should be on the same team.
Yeah,
that's my view. They have the same concerns, they have the same anxieties, they have the same realization that they've been left behind to a large degree in this. But when race enters into this, and when this sort of identifying enemies, and it's usually by color, that person doesn't look like me, doesn't look like me, it doesn't help us. But, I
And
I
Matt,
believe.
you probably hear this because I hear this every day from working class white, black, and brown people. They all give me a variation of Republicans are assholes, but Democrats are elites who don't understand me. I hear a variation of that all the time. And a lot of those people will vote for the asshole over the person who doesn't understand them.
Yeah, I think that's a narrative that's been allowed.
Yes.
And been spun out. It's been contributed to by each members of it, by the Republicans having crazy, insane, anti-constitutionalist people in it. That there's reality to it, and Democrats feed it in certain voices being heard. But to me, for all the faults of the Democrats, and they still actually they actually still have a fundamental belief in our system of democracy.
Bingo.
They still have that belief.
Bingo.
And I might disagree with them on X, Y, and Z. And Joe Biden, who is the leader of the Democrats, is not the far left wing. He's not this. He wants to get through this moment. He wants to try to help people. But Democrats, by and large, the difference to my view is Democrats, by and large, are like, yeah, we still believe in democracy, and we think if people vote, that's the way it should be. There's a huge segment of the Republican Party, in my view, that no longer believes in democracy.
They've given up on it. Completely agree, Matt. Hey, I left the party 3.5 years ago when I ended my hopeless primary challenge against Trump. You left the party when?
2007.
God, I forget that. That was so early. What then, Matthew Dowd, propelled you to leave the party?
I saw what was coming. And I could sense as I was watching this that, and I got a sense of it a little in 2000 as I walked into certain meeting rooms in South Carolina of Republican primary voters and all of that. But I was like, oh, that's just a small segment, blah, blah, blah. And you get through it. And so I saw it coming, and this inability to even actually argue in a rational way. There was no longer, when I was having conversations, it wasn't rational anymore. There was no rationality to it.
Yeah.
It was all, this is how I feel, and no matter what. And so I was like, I'm done with this. And that's why Donald Trump, I remember in September of 2015, and people thought I was crazy when I said Donald Trump was going to be the Republican nominee. In September of 2015. And people thought I was insane. I was like, guarantee it, Donald Trump is more in touch with the Republican base than Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio and any of these others
completely
yahoos.
Oh my God, Matt. Remember Marco Rubio then tries to run a Reagan Morning in America campaign, just utterly clueless as to where the base was.
Well, they still thought the base of the party was like Chamber of Commerce business Republicans.
Help me with this, and I'm going to botch it. I read an article somewhere a couple weeks ago that blamed, maybe it was the Bulwark, I don't remember, that blamed Karl Rove for a lot of this. Like, Karl Rove saw this coming too, and he got George W. Bush in the campaign to push a lot of the populist culture war shit. And that kind of started it. He blamed Rove for that. Does that make any sense?
Well, I think, and I've known Karl for many, 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 many years and worked with Karl, obviously, in 2000 and 2004. Karl, I think, had a good sense of the Republican primary and knew how to win it.
Yeah.
I think George Bush in 2000, there was a number of these sort of pre-Trump Trumps that came out of the woodwork and contested George Bush, who tried to keep this sort of odd coalition together of evangelicals and populists and business leaders and all that. And he was able to maintain it. And as soon as he was gone, it started to fray in that. But I think Karl Rove has to take, I don't say Karl Rove singularly did this, but Karl Rove has to take some of the responsibility because Karl Rove adopted an ends justify the means.
There you go. Okay.
Mentality, which is, I'm going to win these elections.
Yeah.
And it by whatever means necessary. And when you do that, you lose the moral ground that we need to be rooted in.
How much of this, Matt, is the issue of race? And I ask that with this context. When I began in the Tea Party and I ran as a Tea Party guy, my thing was the size of government, the debt, boom, boom, boom. That's all I talked about. But I would hear some of the culture shit and I'd hear some of the race Obama stuff. And I ignored it. I regret that, but I didn't pay enough attention to it. How much from the base is kind of racially motivated?
I don't think you can separate it from all of the other things. And so it's a cultural moment where race is a big part of how people see America,
Okay.
right? And for 200 and some years in our country, the people that ran things were white, Christian, heterosexual men,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that started changing as women got more power, as minorities started serving in government, as people with different sexuality did. And all of that, I think, led to this idea of we've lost America. And in too much of how people define America defines it based on white Christianity. And it's an intimate part of it. It's not solely the reason, but it's intimate a part of how people define what they believe is American culture.
Then what happens to your and my former party? Its base is middle-aged and older white guys. The older white guys die. I mean, if they're not replacing themselves, what happens to the party, man?
Well, I think we're in this moment where the parties, or at least one of the parties, has to fundamentally alter itself, and this has happened a number of times at these same moments in American history. I mean, the Democratic Party in the late 1920s, 1930s, 1940s redefined itself completely. And so the Democratic Party that ended up being by 1952 was a very different Democratic Party than it was in 1928. So it might have had the same name. It was a different Democratic Party. The Republican Party has done the exact same thing. Obviously, in the last time I think we've been in a situation as bad as now was the Civil War and the run up to the Civil War. I think we're in that same kind of moment.
Oh, spot on. Yeah.
The Whigs got left behind, and a new thing formed. The GOP formed, and so I think. Stop
there, Matt Dowd. Hold that thought, and I want you to repeat what you said, because I have said often that I think that we're in like a third revolutionary period, the American Revolution, the Civil War, and now. And
I actually think we're in a fourth revolution.
Oh, explain that.
So I think we had the American Revolution that established the first modern democracy in the world. And then we had the Civil War, which actually then changed America's approach. It became an much more industrialized country where the right to vote was expanded beyond white people.
Yeah.
That was a revolutionary moment.
Yeah.
And then I think it was a revolutionary moment in the midst and aftermath of the Great Depression and the World War II, which is where we became the power in the world, and government fundamentally changed in how it interacted in people's lives. Those are three revolutionary moments. We're in another one.
Are we then disagree with this or agree? I don't think we've been this divided as a people since just before the Civil War. Craziness or no?
Well, it's funny you say that, because I said that before Trump's inauguration in 2017.
I probably heard you say it.
I said that we are as divided as we've ever been
Yes.
since the Civil War, and I agree with that. I mean, it was a time of great transition and crisis in the Depression and World War II.
Yeah.
And different things were going on, and then we emerged from that differently. But I think we're in the same space that we were, both economically, the change that happened economically in the country during the Civil War and the aftermath, where we went from an agrarian-based economy to a industrial-based economy. That same type of thing has happened in our economy, and our politics is doing the same things. And we have this threat of violence. I don't think we're going to have state against state like we did in the Civil War, but we do have roving militias, and we do have all that, and we do have the threat of violence that exists today. And so I think we're in that time that that we have to figure out a way to get through with the least amount of damage to get to the renewal of our democracy.
Okay,
We have to get to the renewal of our democracy.
Okay. Then I suppose then my first question is, can we get there?
Well, we have before.
Yeah.
And I still have a trust in the vast majority of the Americans that they want to get there, that they're decent, good folks that want to get there and that are concerned about their communities, their neighborhoods, their country, and they want to get to that place. They respect other people. They respect other people's differences. They do all that. I think most Americans, the loudest voices may not feel that way, but I think most Americans are in that place. Is it guaranteed that we will? No. Because one of the issues, one of the concerns I have is there's not a lot of evidence in the history of the world of the success of multicultural democracies.
Right. That's a great point, Matt.
Ours will be the first biggest one ever if we get there, of a multicultural. Most democracies all exist in one culture and primarily one race.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's where we have to get. We have to get to the renewal of our democracy as a multicultural democracy where all viewpoints and people are accepted and can be practiced. And it's going to take leaders with the right empathy and rationality to get us there. I actually think Joe Biden, who I actually think has been good through this, is only a transitional figure in this.
Yes.
I think he's only a transitional figure in this. I'm going to say something that I hope maybe one day, years from now, we're going to come back to. I actually think the most important election that's going to happen is the 1932 presidential election.
Okay, Matthew Dowd, stop you in your tracks right now, and I want you to explain that.
So I think this next election is the choices are pretty clear. It's Donald Trump or Joe Biden. It's not going to change people's fundamental approach to things. And then we're going to go in this fraying. We're in this fraying period of 1928, and I have no idea what's going to emerge from 1928. There may be the clinging to the Biden-attached people, and then the Trump-attached people, and then I think 1932. So I think that's sort of that transitional time of the Biden and his continuing legacy, or Trump and his continuing legacy. Then I think 1932 sets us up to hopefully leaders born after 1960, which I think we really need to get to.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because I thought we were there when Obama was born in 1961, and I thought, okay, we're here and we're going to get to this. Well, we then went right back to the 1940s.
Yeah.
People born in the 1940s who have not criticizing, but have a totally different outlook on American society based in their time of birth and based in their time of growing up. So that's why I think 1932, the presidential election in 1932, it can bring us to that renewal of an American democracy in the 21st century.
I think, Matthew, do you agree? The fourth American Revolutionary period, we're still kind of fairly early into this, right?
No, I actually think it's hard to, when this actually began, when this moment began, really fundamentally began. I would say, I would pinpoint it around 2007 and 2008, when this sort of the global financial crisis hit, all this people suffered. And then we've gone through this, we've gone through COVID, and we've gone through these different things. And you have to look at it past politics and more broad, big waves and then it's sort of changing nature of how we define marriage, changing color of the country, all of those things, changing approach to sex and all of those things together in a cultural moment. So I would say we're 15 years into it.
Okay.
And we probably have another, these periods usually last around 20 years. From my sense of history, these periods of crisis and unraveling last around 20 years. And so that's why I think it's going to be in the early 1930s when we're out of this.
And I think you're right in that this isn't going to be a civil war, state against state kind of thing. But there's an urban-rural piece to this. And I worry that there will be rural sections of this country that'll just break away and want nothing to do with urban, suburban America.
I mean, that may be. I think there's a whole sense of people in rural that they're going to, I mean, the data on all of this
Yeah.
and government assistance and
Yes.
and the growth of the economy and all of that. They would be like, it'd be like Haiti breaking away, right?
Yeah.
It would
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
I mean,
They don't want to
they
hear
wouldn't have
that, but you're right.
they wouldn't have a white Haiti, we'll call
Yeah.
it a white Haiti. They wouldn't have infrastructure. They wouldn't have, it would. And I think I still believe that there's a way to bind us together. I mean, one of the things that I think, if I were a presidential candidate coming out of all of this,
Yeah.
I would advocate a way to bind us together with national service, a domestically related national service, where you take ends of the barbell. You take young people and old people that have retired or old people that have time to give, pair them together and send urban people to rural areas
Yeah.
and rural people to urban areas, and figure out a way to bind people together through a sense of national service, of serving the country. Because that to me is a great way to get people out of their comfort zone, and great way to sort of people to see other people that, oh, I thought these people were crazy and they're actually not.
So what you're saying, Matthew Dowd, I don't want to speak for you. I generally I lean bearish when I think about the American experiment staying together. You seem to be leaning bullish.
Well, I guess I have to. I mean, I have to because I got to get up every day. I mean, I've believed in this. I mean, I was dedicated to politics and all this since
Yeah.
I was 12 years old.
Yeah.
And loved it, loved every part of it, believed in it, been disappointed as you have along the way, very disappointed, discouraged and all of that. My sense of examination of our history gives me hope that we've gone through this. We can do this. We have the sense of it to do this. I think we have to have humility. I think a lot of us have to have humility in this process, that we don't, maybe the answers we thought from 10 years or 12 years or the way we did things wasn't the right way. And we have to give a new generation of folks the idea to experiment in this. But humbleness, I think, is a very important part of this. But I do believe, through looking at our history, that we have the capacity to do it. And I actually think that part is exciting.
Yeah, I agree. Matthew, the Republican Party itself, it's on this Trumpian nationalist populist road. Will it ever get off that? The more establishment Republicans, the principled conservatives, will they ever have a home in that party again?
No.
I don't think
No, I don't think they'll never have a voice in the party. I mean, they may, Mitch McConnell is kind of trying to do things manage things in his last ways, but he's the last sort of majority leader from the GOP like him.
But in our lifetime, people like you and I in our lifetime will probably never have a home in that party.
No, never.
Does
There's
that
no
then in your mind say that some party's got to come along for two people like you and I?
Well, it's got to either be a major revision of the existing party that then frays it, and then it goes through a transition period, which obviously, as I mentioned, happens. A lot depends on how the Democratic Party adapts to this, and whether they adapt to it in this moment or they stay the course of where they've been on. I actually think do I think multi-party system would be great? Yeah, but that's not us. We're ones that we may go through a rise of a third party, but quickly that either goes away or it becomes one, and that you always have two. And so I think we're going to have two parties. What those exactly look like in the 2030s, I don't fundamentally know. But the Republican Party as it exists today doesn't have room for anybody that's a thoughtful, principled conservative.
Is there room in the Democratic Party for thoughtful, principled, center-right conservatives? Can it be that big?
There could be.
There could be.
There could be.
Actually, you know what? That's a great answer, because it's clear there's no room in the Republican Party. There could be in the Democratic Party. That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
Hey, last question for you, my friend, and I appreciate your time. You have been in this business for a long time, since you were a very young man. And I mean, you've been go for a long time. Part of why I love to follow you on Twitter now is because you put out non-political stuff too. You quote writers and poets and musicians every day. You reference these people. I know in your head and your heart, you're still as into things, but are you purposely slowing down your political activity?
Well, I've come to a place, both for my own internal sanity, of a sort of a meditative, prayerful practice every day, which I do every 10 years. And I started that quote stuff as I didn't start it as a way. I started it as a way of myself, of my own meditative practice, and then I would post it for myself. And now there's an audience for it.
Yeah.
So it's my own internal sense of self. I've come to the place that I don't think the answer to our problems is political. I think the political equation is important, but I think the answer to our place is spiritual. And I don't mean spiritual as in religious. Yeah. I mean spiritual as in soul impacting. And I have come, having gone through politics, I'm still going to be involved in politics. I still believe in this, but I've also realized that leading with politics isn't going to solve the problem.
Two final questions. One, just a very quick political question. The Trump-Biden matchup. You put a gun to my head right now. I think Trump has a little bit of an edge. I think Trump wins. Trump-Biden matchup. Disagree with me.
I think Biden wins, but I wouldn't bet my house on it.
That's a good answer.
I wouldn't even bet my Jeep on it or my truck on it. But I think Biden wins, but it's not going to be a mandate win.
No. Close with this. You wrote a book last year, Revelations on the River, and I encourage everybody listening to us to get Matthew Dowd's book, The Revelations on the River, that came out last year. Describe what you did with that book.
That goes along with what I was saying, which was this sort of spiritual awakening that I had, that I was sort of in both about like a sense of, an examination of love and fear and inclusion and exclusion, and sort of and I sort of wrote it as a microcosm of myself, but it sort of talked about it as a country, that we're in the same space, that we're in this same place that we have to get through an awakening in this process. And so, it's called Revelation on the River because I wrote it on the Blanco River where I live in Texas.
Get it. Buy the book, Revelations on the River. Follow Matt Dowd on Twitter, at Matthew J. Dowd. Always good, interesting, reflective stuff. Matt, my friend, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, brother. Keep doing what you do.
I found it. Look, I love ice cream, but I'm not 18 years old anymore, so I can't eat a lot of it. But I found it. I found a healthy ice cream alternative that actually tastes great. Sweet pea non-dairy ice cream. Get this. It's made with chickpeas. I know, it tastes great. Tastes and feels like real ice cream. Look, I screwed around with soy-based and oat-based products. They all tasted like shit. Sweet pea made from chickpeas is the first healthy alternative I've found that I absolutely love. I'm in DC. I get sweet pea at Giant Foods. If you're in DC, Philly, Pennsylvania, go to Giant Food stores. If you're in New York City, go to Balducci or Key Foods. In San Francisco, go to Nugget. You will absolutely love this. It tastes great. Made with chickpeas. That's so cool. It tastes great.
Thank you for listening. Remember to listen, share, and follow White Flag with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been White Flag with Joe Walsh.